All right, thank you so much, guys, for coming. Today we're going to finish off real quick the female reproductive system, and then we'll go on to pregnancy. I think last time we were talking about how oogenesis occurs, and just a quick recap, right? Oogenesis has got two sort of phases going on simultaneously. The first thing is that the oogonia, just like the spermatogonia, have got to divide to form a haploid cell. So you have your oogonia, which becomes a primary oocyte, all right, after the first mitotic division, and then meiosis occurs. Meiosis 1, you have a secondary oocyte, right? And then meiosis 2 is kind of arrested at metaphase 2, and then you form a secondary oocyte. Okay. At the same time, there are cells that are surrounding the oocyte that then become the corpus luteum, right? So you have the primary oocyte surrounded by a single layer of flat granulosa cells forming the primordial follicle, right? And then the primordial follicle goes on to, as the cells start to accumulate and divide around the oocyte, you then have the, primary follicle with granulosa cells that are now cuboidal, right? And it's still single layer. And then the layers start to increase, all right? Those layers increase and increase until you start to get fluid, filled vesicles, okay? In your secondary follicle, and then you form the mature or Graafian follicle. When all those fluid-filled, vesicles become an antrum, which is a single antrum, right? And also you have the zona pellucida that forms on top of the oocyte membrane, okay? And then you have the theca externa, theca interna that develops on the outside as you become the secondary follicle, all right? And then all those cells that were surrounding the follicle will become the corpus luteum, right? Which then produces estrogen and progesterone. Okay, so differences with spermatogenesis. The oogenesis starts in utero, whereas spermatogenesis starts at puberty, all right? And another thing, when the oocyte is dividing to form the haploid cell, it always forms a polar body. All the organelles and cytoplasm go to the cell that's going to become the oocyte, all right? And of course, you then form one oocyte instead of 4 sperm cells as in the spermatogenesis, all right? Okay, so of course, I want you to know those processes together here. This is showing follicle development and also oocyte division. Okay, together is oogenesis. Okay, so that's a quick recap on that. So this just shows you how the oocyte forms. I'll quickly play this little video to kind of get that up again, because
a primordial follicle consists of an oocyte surrounded by a single layer of squamous granulosa cells. A primordial follicle becomes a primary follicle as the granulosa cells become enlarged and cuboidal. The primary follicle enlarges, and the granulosa cells form more than one layer. The zona pellucida forms around the oocyte. The structure is called a secondary follicle when fluid-filled vesicles develop among the granulosa cells and a well-developed capsule, or theca, becomes apparent around the granulosa cells. The theca possesses internal and external layers. The structure is called a mature follicle when the fluid-filled vesicles form a single antrum. At full maturity, the oocyte is located in the cumulus mass. During ovulation, the oocyte is released from the follicle, along with some surrounding granulosa cells of the cumulus mass, called the corona radiata. Following ovulation, the granulosa cells divide rapidly and enlarge to form the yellow corpus luteum. When the corpus luteum degenerates, it forms the white corpus albicans.
Okay. So this oocyte is arrested in prophase 1 all the way until ovulation, which is like day 40. Just before ovulation, that's when the second meiotic division is stimulated, to finish up, all right? And then, well, the first meiotic division finishes up, and then it is arrested in the middle of the second meiotic division, and it will be metaphase 2. Okay, and it only finishes the second meiotic division if it's fertilized. Okay, so oogenesis is simply the division of the oocyte and the formation of the follicle, which becomes the corpus luteum. Okay, so those are the two things I want you to know. In the exam, I may ask you to say, talk about the formation of the oocyte, which means it will be arrested at metaphase 2, just like spermatogenesis. Okay, or I could say, talk about the development of the follicle. Then you talk about the primary, primordial follicle, primary follicle, secondary follicle, mature follicle. Okay, see those two things. You see what I'm saying? The corpus luteum is formed by the follicular cells, and the oocyte forms from the oogonia to form the haploid egg cell. Okay. Or sometimes I could just give me the whole process of oogenesis where you talk about both things happening at the same time. Okay? Like that thing that I showed you. Alright? That page with all those pictures. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the reproductive tract of the female, reproductive system. We'll start with the uterine tubes. So we've already covered the primary organ for the female, which is ovaries, right? That produce, and we talked about oogenesis, how you produce the egg cell. Okay, so now we're going to talk about those other female genitalia that assist with all this reproduction. Okay, so the uterine tubes, we said they're called fallopian tubes, also called oviducts. Okay, and then of course they extend from the uterus, from the fundus part of the uterus. The uterus is just like a stomach, you know what I'm saying? In terms of the divisions. So there's the ovary. Okay. So you got your fundus here, just like the fundus of the stomach, and then you got the body of the uterus, which is the main, compartment, and then of course the cervical canal, which is like a caloric region. You know what I'm saying? Okay, it kind of makes sense. Okay, so that's what it is. So the fallopian tubes, they start off with finger-like projection called fimbri, and it's very much widened at the end there. Okay, and it forms about 7 or so centimeters of it is widened up. Okay, of those fallopian tubes. Okay, which is where fertilization occurs. All right, and then that widened part is called the infundibulum. So you get the fimbri, then the infundibulum, and then it tapers off the fallopian tube as it approaches the uterus, the fundus, which is the top part of the uterus. Okay, so you get the fimbri and so forth, and then that widest part of the fallopian tube is called the ampulla, right? It's the widest and the longest. It's about 10 centimeters long, and this forms about 7 to 8 centimeters, the widest part. And so fertilization kind of occurs right there in the infundibulum. Okay? Once the egg starts to get towards here, fertilization may occur, but it's less likely. It occurs really up here. Okay? So it is the outer layer, of course, the serosa, just like the stomach, the digestive tract. It's got the serosa, which is connective tissue. And then, of course, the muscular layer, because the muscular layer, you need it to move the egg along, together with the cilia, okay, that will move, because the egg is, number one, very cumbersome, it's huge, and it doesn't have a tail like the sperm does, so it would need the contraction of the uterine tubes and also the fimbri to move, the cilia, because the cilia is lined up like that, and it's got cilia like this, and the egg will be in the middle, and then the cilia will move it up, okay? So this columnar epithelium ciliated right there in the uterine tube. So you gotta know these structures, and you gotta know the functions of these structures. So the muscular contractions, of course, and the cilia are the ones that move along the egg towards the uterus. Okay, so you gotta know each of these organs and be able to tell about the functions of them. Okay, so you've got this, standard electron microscope picture here showing the cilia. Okay, and in the middle of scattered along the cells, among the cells, we get these PEG cells. These are non-ciliated, and they are glandular sort of cells that produce secretions, nutritive secretion. Remember, the egg cell is not attached to anything while it's moving towards the uterus, and so these secretions will help out with nutrients for the egg as well. Okay, so the PEG cells produce a nutritive solution that will help to give nutrients to the egg. Okay, so those are the PEG cells. All right, the rest of them are ciliated, and you know what that is for. All right, for movement of the egg cell. All right, so the uterus. Okay, we started the ovary, we went to the uterine tubes or oviducts, now we're at the uterus. Okay, in the uterus, that's, like I said, it's got the body, the fundus, and the cervix, just like the stomach does. You have those regions. Okay, this is where implantation occurs, and it is the uterus that sustains the developing fetus to birth. All right. Like I said, remember that time there are these ligaments that hold and the uterus in place, plus all the other organs like the fallopian tubes and the ovaries too. Okay, so the broad ligament, I said, is one that is attached to all the sides of the uterus. It's attached to the broad ligament, and it's broad because it will span all the width of the uterine tubes as well. And then the round ligament that kind of goes around that and anchors the in place, the uterus in place, the round ligament, and then the uterosacrum. Remember last time when I drew the uterus, I said this is the uterus cervix over here, and this is the vertebral column, and this is the sacrum. The uterus is also held by a ligament that attaches the sacrum towards the back. So it's kind of sort of held, anchored right in the middle of the abdominal pelvic cavity, right? By all these ligaments back and forth. Okay? So that's the other one that we didn't see last time. And it only attaches the uterus to the sacrum, the tailbone, right? Okay, so it's got the perimetrium, which is the outside connective tissue, all right? And then it's got the myometrium, you know what that is, right? What is the myometrium? The muscle layer, of course. And then the endometrium, which is the inner lining. The inner lining of the uterus is very important because that's where implantation occurs, and it is the mom's contribution towards the placenta. Okay? I think the module gets questions about the placenta as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about it when we discuss the pregnancy part. All right? And then the fetus will provide the chorion as the part of the placenta that will mesh into the endometrium. And then that's how the fetus will get nutrients and so forth and avoid waste. All right? So gotta know, of course, the three layers of the uterus and what the function of it is. Okay? And then, of course, the uterine cavity is made of the main cavity proper and then the cervical canal. Okay? Cervical canal. All right, so that's it right there. In the uterus, of course, implantation of the fetus, and we'll talk about that later on. Okay, it's very close in the fundus region. Okay, it shouldn't go lower than that because then you get your problems, and we'll talk about that later on. Some of the problems with the placenta formation when we talk about pregnancy. Okay, so uterus, of course, you gotta know what the main function of it is to sustain the developing fetus. All right, that's where implantation occurs. All right, so of course the vagina, this is used as the birth canal. Okay, and then of course, also it is used as the channel to void the menstrual flow. Okay, every month. The second, so the female organ of copulation, it's about 10 centimeters long. All right, and connects the cervix, you know, to the vestibule. The vestibule is the opening of the external part of the female genitalia, which includes the clitoris up on the top, the urethra right there, and then the vaginal opening here. And this space here, that's what is called the vestibule. It's like a reception, or like a, you know, like a the lobby or something. You know what I'm saying? So that's where everything kind of opens up into. All right. So that's the vestibule. So of course it consists of smooth muscle there because it contracts, especially during sexual intercourse. All right, and it, of course, because of the friction and all that, it is protected by stratified squamous epithelium, just like skin is. You know, the skin outside skin is stratified squamous. All right, and then of course, in a virgin, the vaginal opening is closed up by the hymen, which is perforated, okay, to allow menstrual flow. It's properly removed on the first sexual intercourse. Okay, so that's the vagina there. Right. So moving right along. Okay, so external genitalia. All right. So far we've talked about internal genitalia, right? The uterus, the vagina, the fallopian tubes, the ovaries, they're all inside. They're all internal. So now we're talking about the external genitalia. All right. Like I said, the vestibule is where all these organs open up. I mean, the vaginal entrance orifice and also the urethral orifice opens right there in the vestibule. All right. So, like I said, it's a space through which the vagina and the urethra open. All right. And the vestibule has got erectile tissue columns on the side called vestibular valves. All right. These are made up of the corpora spongiosum, okay, which is the same corpus spongiosum that is the urethra in the male penis, okay, so it forms a valve here, which is erectile tissue, and the vagina is kind of in the middle here. So during sexual intercourse, these valves become erect, and then they start to squish on the opening of the vagina, so that it creates more friction between the penis and the vagina. All right, so this is the same erectile tissue that the male has, the female has. The other two are in the corpus corpora cavernosa, form the clitoris, and those are the other two erectile tissue columns in the penis. It's the same thing, and we'll show you when the developing fetus develops, and you see all these structures are the same. And then they just grow into the penis, or grow a little bit into the clitoris. All right. So that's what it is. So part of the external genitalia, okay, includes thick fatty folds on the outside called labia majora. All right, and there's two vestibular gland openings. Okay. The greater vestibular gland kind of opens right there in the vestibule. This is the vestibule, this is the vagina, and this is a vestibular gland opening here, vestibular gland opening there. The greater vestibular glands. And they produce mucus just like the bulbourethral glands. Okay. One of the things I want you to remember is which glands are synonymous with which male and female. Okay. So the clitoris already we know it's synonymous with the male penis, right? Okay, and then the vestibular glands, they produce mucus that also lubricates the vagina, just like the bulbourethral gland produces mucus that lubricates the gland's penis, the head of the penis. All right. So on the female, you've got when the labia majora are not parted, there is a crack right in the middle, and that's what's called the pudendal cleft. Okay. From the word pudendum, that collectively groups all the external genitalia. Pudendum is to hide or to be shy. So the pudendum, like the labia majora, minora, protects the opening of the vagina and the urethra. Okay, so that's where that comes from. Okay, and then the labia minora inside form a little covering of the clitoris, like almost like a hoodie. That covers the clitoris. That's the thin folds on the inside, which are very rich in blood vessels. That's why they are pink, even in dark individuals. All right, and the space between the vaginal opening and the anus is the perineum, and that perineum is usually what is cut when they perform an episiotomy, when the birth canal is not wide enough instead of incurring vaginal tears because the baby is maybe too big or something like that, they just make an incision from the vagina towards the anus to make the opening a little bit wider, and that's called an episiotomy. And this is where, right on the clinical, so the anus will be here, and so this space here, that's what is the perineum. Okay, so know what the function of the vulva. This external genitalia, the labia majora, labia minora, are also called vulva. And vulva, okay, means a covering or to wrap around. Pudendum means shine or to cover up, which is also the collective name of all these external genitalia. All right? All right. So the greater vestibular glands open up here, the glands that produce mucus. Then the lesser vestibular glands open close to the urethra. Okay? So there's multiple openings right in the vestibule that produce the mucus that wets the vagina. All right? Very good. And then this is the area here. So this will be the labia majora. All right? And of course, they're kind of parted at this time. And this area here is the vestibule. Okay? And the clitoris over here, and the labia minora in the middle. Okay? And this is the perineum from here to there. So they usually make an incision from there during childbirth if the birth canal is not wide enough. All right? So the function of these external genitalia, the vulva, or is to protect the opening of the vagina and the urethra. All right? So mammary glands, of course, breasts are used for milk production. All right? And the hormone that causes milk production is called prolactin. I think one of the modules had a question about these hormones. And then another hormone that actually causes milk lets down, to squeeze the muscles that surround those glandular cells so that milk actually comes out. That's oxytocin. Oxytocin is the same hormone that causes contraction of the uterus because it affects smooth muscle. So the smooth muscle surrounding the mammary glands, the glandular cells, so that after the production of milk, during suckling, then those muscles contract because of oxytocin. Okay, so it's a glandular lobes, okay, that are kind of cushioned and held in place by connective tissue, adipose tissue as well. All right, and they consist of lobules that connect ducts, which are called lactiferous ducts, that of course open up at the nipple. So the nipple has got multiple openings, and then of course the areola. Of course, the areola is that dark spot around the nipple, and that dark spot is usually rough. It's not smooth, right? And it has glands that are modified sweat glands that produce an oily fluid. The areola does. And what's the oily fluid for? You can imagine when the baby is suckling, right? What happens when the baby is suckling? It's sucking on that. It's licking the nipples dry. So the areola with those glands, they produce an oily fluid that prevent chafing of the nipples during suckling. See what I'm saying? And also the areola has a bunch of melanin in it. That's why it's darker than the skin surrounding it. Of course, melanin protects against mutations and stuff like that. All right? So that's if I ask about the functions of the areola, you know about it, right? The two functions. It's got lots of melanin and it has these glands in it. That's why it's nodular. In appearance, it's rough because it produces an oily substance that will prevent the nipples from chafing up and crackling dry due to the suckling. Okay. Of course, then there are suspensory ligaments that hold the breast tissue up. Okay, so they don't really sag too much. All right. Okay, so that's the mammary gland, and this here is of course showing, the nipple on the outside, and then the areola with those glands that produce an oily substance that keeps the nipples from drying off during suckling, and of course the lactiferous ducts there, and of course the suspensory connective tissue that holds the breast up. okay, and then of course adipose tissue that surrounds these glands that fills up the breast. All right. Okay. So, and this I like to show this mammogram, which is an X-ray showing. So you could definitely see lumps if there's. That's how they diagnose breast cancer. And so I just wanted to put it up there, and you can you see the skin on the outside, and you see the muscle, the pectoralis major here. With the females, they have the pectoralis major just underneath the breast. That's all. Okay, but they still have the pectoral muscles, and then of course the connective tissue that holds it. So that's a clean mammogram right there, with no lumps in it. And then of course remember the lactiferous, the myoepithelium. You see this kind of brown covering those alveolar glands. You see, that's myoepithelium. That's what contracts due to oxytocin during milk letdown. Okay, I think it was in the exam I talked about one of the multiple choice questions. I think it was your exam. It talks about milk letdown and oxytocin. I think it was for the other guys in endocrine system. But anyway, the oxytocin is what causes these myoepithelial cells to contract so that milk comes out. Right, and then it's conducted throughout those. So the physiology of the male reproductive, female reproductive system. So we're going to talk about, of course, the menstrual flow and the stages of development during the monthly cycle. What happens to the uterus and so forth. All right, and the hormones that are involved. Of course, when a female reaches puberty, which can vary from 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 even, depends on the female. You get an increase in secretions of gonadotropins, releasing hormone, GnRH, right? The gonadotropins here are FSH and LH, both in male and female, okay? But LH does different things in the male compared to the female. We said in the male, it causes for production of testosterone, right? It stimulates interstitial cells in these testes, right? And then in here, LH does several things. It causes the formation. Remember saying the oocyte is arrested in metaphase 2, prophase 1, and then it quickly divides up and is arrested in metaphase 2. That division is stimulated by the LH surge, because LH occurs just before ovulation. There's an LH surge, so LH does that in the female. All right. FSH always causes follicle stimulation, so it causes this oogonia as well as the spermatogonia to start to divide, so you can produce more egg cells or more sperm cells. All right. So that's that. And then of course estrogen has an effect on the uterus, and we'll talk about that in pregnancy a little bit more. It causes the endometrial lining to proliferate, and then the progesterone makes the lining of the uterus to become more glandular. Okay, to become more glandular, and it has those spiral glands, so it's just to secrete, and then we'll talk about that a little bit. So increased estrogen and progesterone promote the development of the female primary and of course secondary reproductive characteristics, right? Just like testosterone does the same thing for the male, right? So, good. And the first period is called menarche. Menarche is to begin, the beginning, all right? So menarche is the first period in a female, the first ever period. So the menstrual cycle, and I think in the module it was asking you about the stages of the menstrual cycle. There's 3 of them, okay? The first 5 days, 4 or 5 days, is a menstrual, a period where you have the menses flowing out of the vagina, right? Okay, and then that is the breaking down of the lining of the uterus. Okay, and then it rebuilds itself, and that's the proliferation phase, which is the second one. And we'll talk about the hormones responsible for that and the actions happening there in a little bit. Then after the proliferation phase, then you have the secretory phase, where those glands that are being produced in the uterus produce also a nutritive fluid. Because remember, the first 7 days, the developing embryo has not implanted, okay? And it's going to need all these nutritive secretions and so forth from the uterine tubes and also from the uterus itself. So you have the secretory phase, which is pretty much 14 days to 28, okay? which is the last day of the cycle. So these are the three: menstrual, proliferation, and then of course secretion. All right. So we know that it's the secondary oocyte that is ovulated, and it's arrested in metaphase 2. So it doesn't quite complete the second meiotic division. Okay. It only completes it if it's fertilized. All right. So those are the three stages, and we'll talk about each one basically. And they're descriptive too. The name tells you what's happening during that stage also. The menstrual phase, of course, that's when the menstrual flow comes out. That's when the lining of the uterus is broken down, which comes with blood and some cells. And of course, the secondary oocyte will come out arrested in metaphase 2, okay, with the menstrual flow. So the discharge of blood and part of the uterine lining that occurs every month at the beginning of the cycle. The first 4 days, periods usually last about 4 or 5 days, depending on the female, but roughly 4 to 5 days it's done. The uterine lining is all shed, except the very inner lining of the at that stage of the endometrium. Okay, because the endometrium is one that grows and sheds, grows and sheds. The myometrium is just there to push the baby out at the end. Okay, the connective tissue just protects on the outside. So it's the endometrium which is where the deal is. Okay, so menstruation begins to decrease this lining, because of progesterone, the estrogen from the previous cycle. Because why? The corpus luteum has started to degenerate. Because remember, the corpus luteum is one that's producing the estrogen and the progesterone. So if it's not fertilized, the corpus luteum will no longer produce estrogen and progesterone. So when they go down, the lining of the uterus starts to shed. All right. So menstrual cycle or menstrual phase, that's what's happening. You're shedding the lining of the uterus, the endometrium. Okay. So the second is the proliferation. So you've just shed the lining. Now you have to rebuild it up again. Okay. In preparation for the next ovulation, which it might be or may not be fertilized. Okay. So FSH and LH will go up, okay, will stimulate, the growth of the, and also estrogen production, okay. Follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, okay, those are the gonadotropins, all right. So that's the beginning of the proliferation phase, okay. So estrogen, what is it doing most of the time? It's proliferating the lining of the endometrium, okay, of the uterus. So estrogen stimulates the epithelial cells to proliferate, so you get more layers and more layers and more layers. All right. So the endometrium starts to thicken. That's estrogen. Okay. Then the progesterone will start to cause the spiral organs to form and glands to form. That's progesterone. So progesterone is mostly responsible for the glands, that would then be active in the secretory stage, right? Since day 5, day 6 to about day 14 is the proliferation phase. Towards the end, you get a surge in LH. Boom. There's a spike, and that surge in LH will do a few things. All right. It will cause the ovulation in the first place, but before it causes ovulation, what is LH going to do? It's going to stimulate the finishing of the meiosis 1, so that meiosis 2 starts and then is arrested in metaphase 2. That's LH that does that. All the way until just before ovulation, it's still arrested as prophase 1. See what I'm saying? And it's only just before ovulation, then it starts to finish off the first meiotic division, and then, because it has to be haploid, okay, and then it will start the second one, but it doesn't finish it, okay. So oocyte will cause, ovulation, formation of the corpus luteum, all right, as well as the division. So it does 3 things. Okay, in the male, it only does activation of interstitial cells to produce testosterone. See what I'm saying? but in the female it's doing 3 things. So if I say, what are the 3 functions of LH in the female, you'll be able to tell me, right? Stimulates the finishing of metaphase 1, of meiosis 1, so that it's now arrested as metaphase 2, just sort of starts the second meiotic division but doesn't finish it. And then causes ovulation itself, all right? And then it will also cause formation of the corpus luteum. Remember, because once the egg is released, then you have those follicular cells that were building up. So it's LH that does the same thing, okay? And then, of course, FSH stimulates follicular development, all right? Mature follicles inhibit development of other, like I was saying earlier on, a few of them start to, mature, but then one becomes dominant, and then it prevents all the other ones. And the ones that started will just kind of sort of degenerate. So every month you lose a few, maybe 20 or so are lost, and one becomes dominant, and then it's one that's ovulated. Okay? So when you have twins or something, either the fertilized one will break into 2, will split into 2, or you have multiple ovulations. Okay? And then you get fraternal twins. Okay? So that's the proliferation phase. Just know the hormones that are involved and what those hormones, the effects they're causing for each of these stages. All right? And then, of course, the secretory phase is the last part. We've been forming all those glands. Estrogen is causing the endometrium to thicken. Progesterone is going to stimulate those spiral glands and to secrete glycogen, lipids, all right? And then it's also going to inhibit uterine contractions. Why? Because you don't want them to contract yet. Otherwise, you have a premature abortion, right? Spontaneous abortion. So sometimes if you have a hormonal imbalance, you may get pregnant, okay? The zygote is fertilized, but then when it implants, because these uterine contractions are not inhibited, then it contracts and then it will release that zygote. Okay? So that's what it will do in the secretion stage. That glycogen-rich, lipid-rich is of course going to kind of nourish the egg cell prior to implantation, because implantation starts day 7 and is complete after another week, in 2 weeks. So so the first kind of 2 weeks you kind of need to have a nutrition, okay, around, and that does it. So, so if fertilization does not occur, of course, then menses will begin, the corpus luteum will degenerate. Okay, because once you form the zygote, then it's gonna form the placenta, which will start to form HCG, which maintains corpus luteum. All right. So HCG stimulates the corpus luteum to persist, and then it will continue to produce estrogen and progesterone. So when we do pregnancy, you will see that after a while, then the placenta takes over the production of estrogen and progesterone. Okay? Once it's established. But in the meantime, the corpus luteum is doing it. That's why you have follicular development in the female, because you need that corpus luteum to produce estrogen and progesterone at the beginning. Okay? Because estrogen and progesterone will continue to proliferate the lining of the uterus and so forth. Okay, so here is the graph showing you what's happening down here visually. And so the menstrual flow takes about 4 or 5 days. It finishes, sheds the lining, and then the proliferation stage, okay? And you can see the levels of the hormones, okay? And then they're going up, because you need more and more estrogen, more and more estrogen, and so forth, and more progesterone towards the end, okay? And then the pregnancy, then the reversal happens. Progesterone goes down, and that's what stimulates the giving birth. But anyway, for now, you see the progesterone going up, and then you see the glands and so forth. The estrogen is also going up, and you see the lining getting thicker and thicker and thicker. And then, if it's not fertilized at day 28, you shed again, so the cycle continues. That's why it's called the menstrual cycle, because it repeats itself cyclically about 28 days, every 28 days. Okay?
The corpus luteum becomes the placenta?
The corpus luteum, no, becomes the, it will just pretty much degenerate after the placenta is established. So the corpus luteum, remember, remains in the ovary, because after, and only the egg cell, the oocyte with the cumulus mass with a few surrounding granulosa cells is released. Okay? And that those cells are called the corona radiata. That's what the sperm has to go through, all the cells, plus the zona pellucida, plus the plasma membrane of the egg cell. But the corpus luteum, the placenta is separate. The placenta occurs in the uterus, and is what attaches the developing fetus to the uterine lining, right? And the corpus luteum remains in the ovary. Once the placenta is established, the corpus luteum is no longer required, and then it completely ceases, and then it just becomes absorbed after that, once the corpus luteum is established.
So it remains in the ovary.
Yeah, the corpus luteum does not leave the ovaries. It stays in the ovary. Okay. I hope that take too much of my time. But this is just showing you something we have already seen, the positive feedback of the gonadotropins on the anterior pituitary. So I'm not going to play that again. You can see it if you want it, but it just shows the, how the gonadotropins negatively control the anterior pituitary. So the menstrual flow and the proliferation stage and the ovulation in the middle. And so this is the menstrual cycle in a nutshell for you, with all those things and the same processes that happen are shown there. Okay. All right. Female sexual behavior with females, it's not as strict as in the males, where they have stimulation, then erection, of course, and then you have resolution at the end, orgasm and resolution, which is the time when the male is not able to be stimulated again. But the female usually has multiple orgasms for starters, and the resolution phase is not really strict, because a female, as long as you continue sexual stimulation, they continue to be stimulated and they get to reach multiple orgasms. Okay, resolution occurs briefly, I guess, for the females. Depends, okay, and it differs on the females too, how many orgasms they have, right? So that's more or less the same thing as the male, except the resolution stage is not as pronounced and definite as in the males. Because in the males, no matter what you do, it doesn't matter what kind of stimulation it is, nothing happens for a while at least. So fertilization. Normally the sperm cells last about up to 5 days, but the sure time is up to 72 hours, 3 days. Okay, but they can last in the female reproductive tract up to 5 days. Okay, it's possible. But if you really want to get pregnant, I mean, reserve it until maybe 3 days prior to ovulation. But the egg is only viable 24 hours after, so that's a short window. So right in the middle, after that, the 15th day after that, it's done. It's no longer viable. You know why? Because by then it has traveled all the way towards the uterus. And fertilization doesn't occur there. Fertilization has to occur in the infundibulum all the way up, very close to the ovaries. Okay, so that in the meantime, when it's traveling down, it's developing. By the time it gets to the uterus, it's about day 7, and it's already developed a little bit. Okay, so if it has already traveled most of the way, no chance of fertilizing again. Okay, all right, because it just to get to the uterus exactly at the time when it's supposed to implant. Okay. So it's usually 5 days before and just 1 day after, right? Okay, so the sperm swim up the reproductive tract of the female, and when fertilization occurs, certain changes occur to the egg cell. Okay, the glycoproteins surrounding it are kind of denatured, and then it kind of, the zona pellucida kind of hardens and separates from the plasma membrane, so that only one sperm will fertilize the egg. Okay, because you don't want 2 sperms to get in there, then it will have an egg of 23 chromosomes. All right? Yeah, that usually spontaneously aborts, because it never, whenever there's too much genetic malformation, that spontaneously aborts, and the female doesn't even know that they were pregnant actually. And it happens a few times, because there are times when you're not protected and you're having sex, and you think, oh, I didn't get pregnant. You may have gotten pregnant, but there were just too many genetic errors in there, and naturally it's voided. Sometimes there's some genetic errors that can persist, like Down syndrome and so forth, which occurs more with age, anyway. You see, so fertilization occurs right there in the infant bowel, all right? And sperm cells have to go all the way up there. That's why they need all the fructose and so forth. All right? All right. So what happens menopause is when a female reaches about 40, 45, 50, it depends on every female. But towards just pre-menopausal period, the phase, the premenopausal phase, the female starts to get irregular periods, and then eventually they cease altogether. There's no egg that's being produced and no menstrual flow, no periods, because the lining of the uterus doesn't, proliferate. So these are the changes, that occur. The vagina becomes a little drier. The uterus, some of the organs get smaller a little bit, okay, because of the hormones. Remember, we said estrogen and progesterone, and they cause these organs to grow for the secondary sex characteristics of the female and so forth. And it has also effect on the cardiovascular system, in that you get hot flashes, all right, where you get hot, and then you really start to sweat because it is vasomotor instability. And sex drive sometimes goes up or goes down. It depends. Sometimes it goes up because psychologically you think, oh, I can't get pregnant anymore. It goes up. But some of the times, it kind of goes down because of the hormones. You don't have estrogen and progesterone anymore. All right? So this is what happens to the reproductive system in both sexes. I'll just talk about both. For males, it's mostly prostate cancer, because the prostate cancer is, if you get old enough, it hypertrophies. Okay, it will do that, and then decrease in sperm production, of course. And more abnormal sperms start to get produced that are not motile or don't move and whatnot. Sometimes erectile dysfunction, because of low T. In females, the most significant age-related change is menopause. All right, when there's no hormones. Not no hormones, but there's not a lot of estrogen and progesterone and so forth. Uterus decreases in size, the vaginal wall becomes drier. That's when most of the time they use lube to have sex and things like that because of all the dryness. Right? There's age-related increase in breast, uterine cancers, okay, ovarian cancer, and so on. Okay, and then that's to compare the different. So this kind of took a little bit long, but that's okay.